When I bought the old 62-foot yacht at the county marina auction, I thought I was buying silence. Waves tapping the hull, gulls circling the dock, a place to start over. What I didn't know was that someone was already living there. And she wasn't just anyone. She called herself the Marina HOA president. Her name was Karen Clark, and she was about to turn my peaceful escape into a war I never saw coming. The first time I stepped onto the deck, I smelled sea salt, rust, and lavender air freshener. The deck creaked beneath my boots. Then I heard it. A hairdryer, a hairdryer. Inside my cabin. She was standing there in a floral robe, slippers on her feet, steaming coffee on my kitchen counter. And when I told her this was my yacht, she just smiled and said, "Not according to the Marina Homeowners Association." That's when I saw it. A laminated HOA notice taped to the cabin door. Community property, under management review. The signature at the bottom? Karen Clark. Printed, bold, and confident. I thought it was a joke, but within a week, I was receiving HOA violation letters in my mailbox. For my yacht, unauthorized docking, failure to maintain community aesthetic, noise disturbance, each one stamped with late fees, legal threats, and her neat cursive signature. When I called the marina office, they told me she'd submitted ownership transfer forms, forged under a company that didn't even exist 6 months ago. She'd rewritten the rules, the paperwork, and even reality itself. But this wasn't just a woman squatting on my boat. This was a woman running a business of deception. And every signature, every fine, every fabricated policy was part of something much bigger. Something that stretched far beyond my yacht. Because Karen didn't just steal my peace. She stole dozens of lives, homes, and retirements. One HOA policy at a time. And when I finally uncovered the truth about what she'd been hiding on that yacht, it didn't just shake the marina. It made national news. Because Karen didn't just steal a yacht. She built an empire on lies. Paul Moore had never planned on starting over at 53. But life has a cruel way of forcing your hand. One layoff notice and a brutal divorce later, the house he once called home was just another line item on a property settlement agreement. What he had left fit into the back of his truck. A few tools, a duffel bag, and a quiet determination not to let the world bury him. That's why when he spotted the marina auction listing for an abandoned 62-foot yacht, stripped, sun-faded, and half-forgotten, something inside him stirred. It wasn't just a boat. It was a chance, a new anchor, a way to build something that was truly his. The marina sat at the edge of town like an old memory. Cracked concrete walkways, bleached wooden planks creaking with every tide. The air was thick with the smell of salt and diesel, tangled with gull cries and the distant groan of rigging ropes. Most of the boats bobbing at their slips were weathered, their paint peeling in lazy curls, but each one told a story. Retirees chasing sunsets, weekend sailors escaping routine, and the occasional dreamer like Paul, trying to find their way back to solid ground. When Paul first walked the dock, he noticed the community had its own rhythm. Fishermen in faded caps shared thermoses of coffee at dawn. Couples strolled the pier at dusk, pointing at sailboats like children at a candy shop. But woven into that quiet, sun-bleached charm was something else. Subtle, but unmistakable. A presence. Signs were posted at nearly every corner. Keep your dock clear. HOA Rule 7B. Approved colors only for boat covers. Do not feed the birds. $250 fine. At first, Paul didn't think much of it. After all, marinas had rules. But there was something off. The tone wasn't friendly guidance. It was more like a warning. Laminated, perfectly aligned, the signs all carried the same bold signature at the bottom. Marina HOA, President Karen Clark. And it wasn't just the signs. Even as he walked, Paul could feel eyes on him. A woman in an oversized sun hat and blazer standing near the marina office. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched just low enough to make it clear she saw everything. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched, measuring him. Still, Paul pushed the unease aside. This was his shot at peace. He'd spent 30 years working in logistics, making other people's dreams run on time. Now he wanted to build something for himself. The yacht, once named Silver Marlin, was anchored at the far end of Dock C, tucked away from the main traffic. Its hull was dull, its deck scattered with leaves and spiderwebs. The railing bore years of neglect, but to Paul, it looked perfect. It was his blank page. For weeks before the auction, he visited the marina after work, just to stand at the edge of the dock and imagine what it could be. Polished wood decks, fresh paint, a place to sit on quiet nights and feel like the world hadn't chewed him up. Every time he came, the marina regulars nodded, offering quiet hellos. But there was always that same figure near the office, scribbling on her clipboard. Karen. The morning he won the yacht, the sky was streaked with orange and gold, the water reflecting it like glass. Paul held the auction slip in his hand like it was a passport. A new beginning. The marina staff gave him a handshake and a half-hearted congratulations, but they seemed nervous. One of them muttered something under their breath about paperwork tangles. Another mentioned almost offhandedly, "She's not gonna like this." Paul didn't ask who "she" was. He already had a guess. As he walked toward Dock C, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots gave way to the groan of old planks. Gulls wheeled overhead. The breeze carried the sharp scent of the sea. Everything felt still, almost cinematic, like the moment before a storm. The closer he got, the more the yacht came into focus. Its white paint worn to a dull yellow, streaked with rust, the railing dotted with gull droppings, an old "For Auction" sign hanging crooked from the stern. But even in its battered state, it was magnificent to him. Big enough to live on, small enough to restore with his own two hands, he ran his fingers along the railing, feeling the grit and salt. "We'll fix you up," he whispered under his breath. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel heavy. That's when he noticed something strange. Taped to the cabin door was a neatly laminated notice, not from the marina, but from the marina HOA. Notice of Community Oversight. Unauthorized boarding prohibited. And underneath, the same neat signature, Karen Clark. Paul frowned. He hadn't even stepped on board yet. How could there already be a notice? He brushed it off. Bureaucracy, maybe. He'd deal with it later. As he approached the gangway, another odd detail caught his eye. Flower pots. 2 ceramic pots with bright red geraniums sat on the deck, freshly watered. That didn't make sense. The yacht had been abandoned for over 2 years. Who had put them there? The marina was quiet. The sound of the water lapping against the hull, the only thing breaking the stillness. Paul shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the feeling that he wasn't alone. He heard something, faint from inside. A clatter, a drawer closing, the unmistakable sound of movement. He paused at the bottom of the gangway, pulse quickening. He wasn't expecting anyone to be here. The paperwork was clear. The sale was final. This was his yacht now. A breeze whipped through the mast lines, making them sing like thin metal strings. The floral scent of those fresh geraniums drifted toward him, mingling with the brine. And for the first time since stepping foot in this marina, Paul felt it, not excitement, not hope, but a prickle of unease at the back of his neck. Someone had been here. Someone might still be here. He took a slow step forward onto the creaking gangway. The deck groaned beneath his boots, and somewhere inside the cabin, a door shut. For the first few days, Paul convinced himself it was all just a misunderstanding. Bureaucracy, a clerical hiccup, some HOA paperwork that just hadn't caught up with the marina auction yet. He told himself everything would be fine, the way people do when they're trying to keep their world from cracking open. But Karen Clark had other plans. The morning after he stepped onto his yacht for the first time, he found a bright orange slip taped to the railing. Notice of violation. Unauthorized mooring. It was printed on heavy cardstock, laminated, and signed in her bold, looping handwriting. At the bottom, a fine amount stared back at him. $1,750. Paul stood there on the gangway, salty breeze brushing against his face, reading the notice twice. It didn't make sense. He owned the yacht. The marina slip had been included in the auction. But as he looked around, he noticed something telling. Other boats had no slips on their railings, just his. By the time he reached the marina office, Karen was already there, clipboard in hand, floral robe replaced by a crisp navy blazer with a golden HOA pin. She leaned against the counter like she owned the place. "Mr. Moore," she said without a hint of warmth, "you can't just show up and park a vessel here without community approval." Paul held up the auction paperwork. "I legally purchased this yacht at auction. I own the slip rights," she smiled. That tight, controlled kind of smile people give when they already have a trap set. "We'll see about that." Within 48 hours, things began to move fast. A letter arrived in the marina mailbox addressed to him. Certified, stamped, and full of HOA legalese. It declared that due to a community ownership clause, the yacht in question fell under shared HOA oversight and could not be occupied or modified without board approval. It was signed by Karen herself as acting president and community executor. Paul hadn't even changed the lock on the cabin door yet, and suddenly he was being told he didn't really own what he'd bought. The other boat owners didn't meet his eye when he walked past them on the dock. Some gave quick nods, others turned away entirely. They'd seen this before. You could feel it in the air, the quiet, careful way they lived under her watch. One older man polishing his sailboat muttered without looking up, "Don't fight her. You'll lose." Then he went silent and scrubbed harder. Then came the inspections. Every morning, Paul would hear the clack of Karen's heeled shoes echoing across Dock C. She'd walk the line with her clipboard, writing notes, measuring, taking photos. Twice, he caught her on the deck of his yacht while he was inside, claiming she was documenting violations. One afternoon, she issued another fine, this time for unauthorized flower pots. The same pots she'd clearly placed there herself. $350, the marina staff stayed out of it. When Paul went to the office, the manager shrugged nervously. "She runs the HOA. They handle everything here. We just do slip maintenance." That was when the frustration began to shift. At first, Paul had been confused, then annoyed. Now, anger began to stir. He had worked hard for that auction. He'd paid every cent legally. And this woman was standing between him and the fresh start he had fought so hard to build. He started documenting everything. Every fine, every visit, every piece of paper she left on his deck. He bought a cheap security camera and mounted it near the mast, angled at the gangway. Within a day, he caught her walking aboard without permission, inspecting the cabin windows like a landlord checking for rent. The deeper he looked into the HOA, the more twisted things became. In the county clerk's office, he pulled the public filings for the marina. Buried beneath pages of legal jargon, he found something alarming. Karen had filed a community ownership amendment just 3 weeks earlier. It essentially claimed any vessel docked for over 30 days automatically became part of the shared marina trust, which gave the HOA rights to decide its use. It was a forged legal maneuver dressed up as community law. Worse still, she had signed it alone. No votes, no witnesses, no board minutes. Paul took the papers to the marina office. The clerk glanced at them and whispered, "She's been doing this for years." When he pressed, the clerk shut down fast. "I have a job to keep," she said, and walked away. That night, Paul sat in the cabin with the creak of the hull and the soft lap of water against the side of the yacht. The lights of the marina glimmered faintly through the portholes. For a moment, he felt the weight of it all press against him. Not just Karen, but the machine she had built, the silence of the other residents, the fear, the rules posted like warnings. But Paul Moore wasn't someone who folded easily. Logistics work had taught him how to track, how to follow paper trails, how to spot the weak seams in a system. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one. He started digging deeper. Through county records and marina archives, he found names, the previous owners of several yachts. Most of them were elderly. A few had passed away. A few had moved suddenly, selling their vessels for suspiciously low amounts. And every transaction had one common thread: Karen Clark. She'd positioned herself as both HOA president and trustee, then funneled boats into HOA community control. It wasn't just harassment, it was theft. The pressure mounted with every day that passed. Paul was slapped with escalating fines, improper deck lighting, non-compliant paint plans, unsanctioned boarding. One morning, she even arrived with 2 men in polo shirts, the so-called HOA enforcement team, and taped a community lock notice across the gangway. "If you don't vacate," she said sweetly, "we'll file an injunction." The marina regulars watched from a distance, but said nothing. A couple of them lowered their eyes when he walked past. It wasn't that they didn't care. They were scared. The emotional weight grew heavy. Paul spent hours at the local records office trying to find anything that could help him. But every door seemed to lead back to Karen. Her fake filings, her connections, her iron grip on the marina. Then something unexpected happened. While checking the bilge pump one afternoon, he noticed a loose panel beneath the main cabin floor. It looked like it had been pried open before. Inside was a sealed, weatherproof container. Old, dusty, heavy. When he cracked it open, he froze. Inside were the original ownership papers of the yacht, notarized, signed decades earlier. But there was more. A series of handwritten notes from the original owner, a man who'd been fighting the marina HOA years before Karen ever showed up. The papers proved 2 things beyond doubt. The yacht had been privately owned, with transferable rights that superseded the HOA. The marina HOA had no legal claim to it, and never did. As Paul held the papers in his shaking hands, the sun was setting outside the porthole, casting an orange glow across the cabin. For the first time in weeks, the fear he'd been carrying flickered into something else: determination. Karen thought she'd buried the truth, but he'd just dug it up from the belly of the yacht. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. The hearing was set for a Friday morning, not in a grand courtroom, but inside the echoing chamber of the Harbor Authority's administrative building, a narrow room with wooden benches, polished floors, and a row of officials sitting behind a long desk. Outside, the marina stretched across the water like a calm witness, boats bobbing gently in the wind. But inside, tension hummed like a taut rope. Karen Clark walked in first, hair perfectly coiffed, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. She wasn't nervous, she was smiling. She took a seat at the front table, set her forged documents in a neat stack, and looked around the room as if she already owned it. Paul sat a few feet away, his hands clenched together. Beside him, the worn leather folder holding the original deed and every piece of evidence he had spent weeks collecting. The smell of salt water followed him inside. His heart was pounding, but not out of fear this time, out of anticipation. The chairwoman of the Harbor Authority adjusted her glasses. "This hearing is regarding vessel number 428, ownership, mooring rights, and HOA jurisdiction. Mrs. Clark, as the initiating party, you may begin." Karen stood up slowly, confidently. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is a simple matter of compliance. Mr. Moore illegally moored his vessel without board approval. As HOA president and trustee of the Marina Community Trust, I'm authorized to reclaim the yacht on behalf of the community." She slid forward a stack of papers, crisp, color-coded, signed with her sweeping signature. The officials nodded, flipping through the documents. Her performance was flawless. She'd done this before. Her tone dripped with certainty. She even glanced over her shoulder at Paul, not with hostility, but with that smug, subtle, "I've already won" smile. But Paul wasn't the same man who'd stood on that dock weeks ago. He stood up. His voice didn't shake. "With all due respect, those documents are forgeries." A ripple went through the room. Karen let out a soft laugh. The kind meant to make someone sound ridiculous without having to say anything. Forged? Mr. Moore, you can't just throw around accusations. Paul walked to the front and placed his folder on the table. He carefully laid out a brittle, yellowed envelope, sealed in wax decades ago. This, he said clearly, is the original ownership deed, filed with the county in 1987. The Marina HOA wasn't even established until 2003. The chairwoman leaned forward. One of the other board members whispered to another. Karen's smirk faltered, just slightly. Paul didn't stop. He placed down more papers, notarized transfer receipts from the auction, certified by the county clerk, and a copy of the original harbor registration showing the vessel's exemption from any HOA authority. These documents prove two things, he said, his voice steady as the tide. One, the HOA has no legal claim to this vessel, and two, Mrs. Clark has been filing false amendments to the Harbor Trust without oversight. The room went quiet. Dead quiet. All that could be heard was the distant sound of gulls outside. The chairwoman slowly picked up one of Karen's filed amendments and compared the signature against a notarized sample from the clerk's office. Her brow furrowed. "Mrs. Clark," she said sharply, "these signatures don't match." Karen straightened her blazer, forcing a smile. Clerical error, common with scanned filings. But then Paul laid down the final blow. A printout. A financial record traced to a shell account linked to Karen's name. Dozens of community buyback transactions routed through that account. The vessels were being claimed under HOA rules and resold quietly through a fake trust, run by her. "She's been stealing boats from elderly owners," Paul said, his voice cutting through the room like a bow through water. "And profiting off it." Karen's face drained of color. A couple of officials shifted in their chairs. One whispered, "We've had complaints." And then, a noise from the back of the room. Several marina residents had shown up to watch. Silent faces who had once looked down at the dock, afraid to meet Paul's eyes. One by one, they began to stand. An older man with a weather-beaten cap held up a faded title of his own. "She did the same thing to me," he said quietly. Another woman stepped forward. "And me." The room was no longer silent. It was alive with anger that had been building for years. And Karen, the woman who strutted down the docks with a clipboard and a grin, suddenly looked very small behind her stack of fake papers. The chairwoman's voice turned cold. "Mrs. Clark, these allegations are serious. Pending verification, all HOA claims are suspended immediately. You are ordered to produce legitimate accounting records and appear before the harbor court." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Paul met her eyes. This time, he was the one who didn't flinch. All at once, the scaffolding she had built, the forged paperwork, the fear, the fake power, began to crack in front of everyone. The board members whispered. The crowd stared. The officials collected her documents like evidence. She'd walked in untouchable. She was walking out exposed. As the harbor police approached to escort her outside for questioning, her hand hovered over the clipboard like it could still protect her. But paper couldn't shield her anymore. Paul exhaled slowly. The deck might as well have been under his feet again. Firm, steady. His. She thought she owned everything. She never imagined the tide would turn. When the verdict came down, it wasn't just about Paul's yacht. It was about years of silent fear finally breaking open. The harbor authority stripped the HOA of its special privileges almost overnight. Every claim Karen Clark had ever filed was thrown out. Every community property seizure she'd engineered was under investigation. The empire she built out of forged documents and intimidation collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. Within 2 weeks, law enforcement swarmed the HOA office. Computers, files, and binders were hauled out in boxes. Marina residents, the same ones who had once looked away in silence, watched as the woman who controlled every corner of their lives was escorted out in handcuffs. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement, elder exploitation. She wasn't just facing fines, she was facing years. For Paul, it wasn't about watching her fall. It was about getting his life back. The yacht that once felt like a battlefield was finally his sanctuary again. He replaced the broken windows, sanded down the deck, and painted the hull a deep navy blue. The name, Silver Marlin, gleamed in gold lettering along the stern. What had once been a symbol of frustration now stood as proof of resilience. Every creak of the wood, every ripple against the hull felt like the world giving him a second chance. But something even more powerful happened around him. One by one, other boat owners started stepping forward. Titles long buried in bureaucratic confusion were dug up, verified, and restored. Elderly residents got their vessels back. Couples who had been bullied out of their slips returned to rebuild what they had lost. The marina, once a quiet place controlled by a single woman's clipboard and smirk, began to feel like a community again. Gone were the laminated signs, the aggressive rule reminders, the endless stream of violation notices. Instead, neighbors shared paint supplies, offered each other spare parts, and even organized a weekend dock cleanup. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about respect. Paul would sometimes stand on the deck at sunset, watching the light stretch across the water like liquid gold. The same spot where he once stood, heart pounding in fear, now felt steady and calm. The gulls still screamed, the dock still creaked. But everything felt different, lighter, freer. Karen's trial made headlines in the local paper. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Details emerged: offshore accounts, fake trusts, and a years-long scam that had stolen property from vulnerable residents. She hadn't just tried to take his yacht. She'd built an entire scheme on greed and power, but she underestimated the wrong man. Her conviction didn't just free Paul, it sent a message. The HOA was permanently dissolved. The marina would now be managed by a neutral harbor trust with clear, fair regulations. No single person could ever hold that kind of control again. The day the news broke, Paul climbed to the top deck and let the wind hit his face. For the first time in years, there was nothing hanging over him. No fake notices, no petty fines, no Karen. He didn't win because he was louder. He won because he stood his ground, because he refused to let someone rewrite the truth. And in doing so, he gave a voice to everyone who'd been too afraid to speak up. This story isn't just about one yacht. It's about power, how easily it can be abused, how quietly fear can spread through a community, and how one person, one single act of resistance, can make everything unravel. Standing there, watching the harbor lights flicker on, Paul felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just relief, pride. People asked him if it was worth the fight. If the legal battles, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing everything had been too high a price to pay. He always gave the same answer. Yeah, he said, because bullies don't stop until someone stands up. He turned the key on the yacht's engine that night. The sound was smooth and strong, the water parting cleanly as the boat drifted out under the evening sky. Around him, other residents waved from their decks, no longer intimidated, no longer silent. This wasn't just a win for him. It was a win for all of them. And as the camera would linger on the soft glow of the marina lights, the story would close with the question hanging in the air. If it were you, would you have fought back or walked away?